So, to start with, Charmaine, I'm going to start with you. If you could just, so the subject of this conversation is what's new in African feminisms. So first of all, can you just say a little bit about your work in this particular context?
I've been living in Nigeria since '93, so that's quite a long time. I started off in the university system as a lecturer in Ahmadu Bello University, but left after 4 years. And that was partly because my husband got a fellowship elsewhere, and you know how it is. Usually the man earns more than the woman. So I followed him, but by that time, '97, the late '97, was when the military entered the academy for the first time in Nigeria. And I tell you, it changed the whole landscape. So we were happy to leave. We came back in '98, and since then, I've been trying to function as an independent feminist scholar activist. And I can tell you it's not easy in Nigeria. My whole goal is to produce intellectual work as a feminist. And what is often taken for granted is that producing any intellectual work requires functioning institutions, networks, resources of different kinds. And my book was really about how that was unraveling in Nigeria. And so it was very difficult to do this outside of that. And the only way I managed to was because I was part of different feminist networks on the continent. So amongst feminists in South Africa, in Ghana, some more international networks located in, with the center in the UK, and others that were more global in the global south. So it's through those networks I've been able to function. Anyway, if I just focus on Feminist Africa 22, that's the one that I've just finished editing. Well, actually, I finished it some time ago, but it's in production. And because it's a special issue and a bumper issue, it's taking longer to produce than it would have been, would have done otherwise. And the theme is feminist organizing, strategy, voice, and power. And it takes off from the 4th African Feminist Forum conference, which was held last year in Harare. The very first of those meetings, really landmark movement building on the continent, began in 2006. And there's been one since then every 2 years, except between 2010 and 2016. Jessica Horn from AWDF and AFF is here today, and there are others too who've been very active in that network. So movement building, feminist organizing, intellectual production has been taking place on the continent, but under very difficult circumstances. And that issue is really about what kinds of issues have, this is FA22, what kinds of issues have feminists organized around? And any kind of organizing implies a vision, you know, a sense of a better tomorrow, a better reality, greater justice, where women are free from all sources of oppression. And so it's about the different arenas in which this happens, whether it's in the political sphere, in cyberspace, in women organizing after long histories of political repression, as in Angola, the formation of national feminist fora in different countries and so on. So, and I should tell you that Feminist Africa, the journal, is the only feminist scholarly journal that is available free on the internet. So if you just Google Feminist Africa Journal, you will see back issues, 22 of them, and there's a real archive there of wonderful feminist work. I would encourage anyone interested in that, and even those who haven't thought about it, do go and read.
Thank you very much. It's a great resource, absolutely, thank you. So, Mona.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be back in Abeokuta. Thank you so much, Lola, for this incredible festival, which is one of my favorite festivals in the world. And as I was talking to my sister and comrade, Laila Hussein, it's wonderful not to be one of only 2 women of color. Everybody here is from across the continent, and it's great. Now, I can't begin any session, I always begin every session with my article of faith, and my article of faith is fuck the patriarchy. Thank you. So, since I was last here in Abeokuta at Ake in 2015, the major change in my life has been this. I was living in Cairo mostly when I came and spoke here in 2015. But what happened since I last saw you? What happened was a fascist fuck called Donald Trump was elected to be president of the United States. And I'm an Egyptian and an American citizen, and I had moved to Egypt to fight the fascists in my country of birth. And so when a fascist was elected to my country of naturalization, I vowed that I would begin to spend my time half the year in Cairo and half the year in New York, or in the US generally. And one of the main reasons I did that is because Western feminism has failed, and it is time for Western feminism to listen to the rest of us. And by failure, I mean, they have lived under such a delusion that everything had been solved, that this Harvey Weinstein shit that is coming out now is a shock to them, whereas it has never shocked us. We always knew that patriarchy committed crimes against our bodies. We were never under any illusion that we were equal, that we were post-feminist. We have been fighting on the front lines of feminism forever. And they have always wanted to rescue us, and so I said, you know what? I'm gonna go to America and rescue some white women. Because 53% of white women voters voted for this fascist fuck called Donald Trump, who's a sexual predator. How can you vote for a man who abuses women like that? So that's basically to give you an idea of the kind of work that I do. I go to places and say the things I'm not supposed to say because patriarchy has taught men and women the things that we should say, and we have to dismantle patriarchy. That is our goal, not to get women to say, Me Too is great, right? But for how long are we going to bleed dry with Me Too? For how long are we going to sit there and say, I was at 4, a man exposed his dick. At 15, I was groped on the pilgrimage, which I was. At 21, a man masturbated while he was asking me the time in the metro in Cairo. For how long are we going to keep telling these stories while patriarchy just makes us go round and round? So say the things that you're not supposed to say, because that is at the heart of my work. Doing that, in Cairo, they put my front page they put my picture on the front page of a newspaper, and I get called a sex activist. I like that. They're calling me a slut. I say, yes, I am a slut. Own the word. I will not be defined by that word. And in the US, my fight there is not just against this idea that Western feminism has succeeded. It's to point out the delusions of Western feminism, but also to fight in the US as a Muslim, because I am a Muslim. And when they look at me, this is not what they expect a Muslim to be. Red hair and tattoos and fuck the patriarchy. But why not? Why isn't this a Muslim? And it's a really interesting time for me to point out in the US that I'm a Muslim right now, because in Egypt I fight the Muslim Brotherhood. I told you this last time. In the US I fight the Christian Brotherhood. In India I fight the Hindu Brotherhood. There are brotherhoods everywhere, right? And my message remains just as it was in 2015 to all the brotherhoods: stay out of my vagina unless I want you in there. And in the United States right now, they're finally seeing the Christian Brotherhood, because there is a man called Roy Moore in the state of Alabama who was running for election, and guess what? He was a child molester. And all of a sudden, these white evangelicals are like, oh, the Muslims do that too. Oh, you like the Muslims now? For the longest time, I'm getting all this shit from these racist white supremacists telling me your prophet this and your prophet that, and now they're using the Bible and Mary to defend this child molester. So no more delusions, yeah? No more pretense that Western feminism has saved anyone. No more pretense, which we've never been under. I've always criticized my men, and I've always been told, shut up, you make our men look bad. No, no, no. What the men do make them look bad. I don't make anyone look bad. So African feminism is on the rise. Not this Africa is rising business, but because of all these networks that you were just talking about, Charmaine, because of what you're about to tell us, once I shut up and give you the mic, because we have never lived under the delusion of anything but we are fighting patriarchy, whether it's religious, political, tribal, of all kinds. And across the continent, and I'm here as an Egyptian, and it's really important for me to be here as an Egyptian, as an African, because this is another problem that we don't talk about enough. Egypt is in Africa, not I'm going to Africa. This is Africa, and I am African. So I'm here to speak to you in love and solidarity, as that Egyptian, as that Muslim, as that African, as that US citizen, and always saying, fuck the patriarchy.
Thank you, Mona. Iheoma.
Okay, how do I follow that? How? In fact, who did the seating arrangement? Okay, my name is Iheoma. I wear several hats. Some of you know me from Alliances for Africa. Others know me as a businesswoman that owns a business that came out of a session at the African Feminist Forum, 2006. I attended a session on women and economic empowerment. Charmaine, can you remember? Jessica, were you there? Okay. Now, at that session, they asked us to talk about, as feminists and as women working in the development sector, what are our retirement plans? And I remember at the time thinking it was easy for me to talk about intimate stuff, sex. People will come and see me and say, Iheoma, I have this problem. And I'll be like, okay. But I never knew what I could do with it, if you understand what I mean. But as a feminist, and as someone dealing with issues around patriarchy, I knew that it was something that I can talk about comfortably and address and write articles about, because I was understanding that theoretical framework. And coming from where I was, I mean, I was born in England, but my parents are Nigerian, from the southeast. They're all Catholics. I'm married into a Catholic family. There's even a priest and a nun in the family. So you can imagine. And over the years, I think I got better at defining myself, but I think that came with age. So I straddle several worlds with my work. I still work in international development, but more importantly, I've sort of opened the cage in Nigeria here for us to begin to discuss publicly about women, sex, sexuality. Now, it helps that I'm coming from international development because I've made it legitimate. So people no longer feel as if, she prostitutes, talking about sex anyhow. See her mouth. But we've transgressed that now, we've passed that. So in my reality, I meet a lot of women, and the earlier session about rape, I was telling Molara that I have a lot of women that have suppressed sexual assault. The families have pushed them into a marriage, and they call our hotline because they're now dealing with issues of intimacy in the bedroom, and there's a problem. Now, I never ever thought I would want to retrain as a counselor, but I'm doing that now because what I'm faced with as a feminist, and knowing where I'm coming from, is that we need to begin to have our own feminist counselors. We need to begin to understand, you know, that what we face is so dire. At the last feminist forum, I mentioned that in Nigeria, things have got worse from when I arrived in 2001. We now have the absolute convergence of evangelical fundamentalism. They're crazy. I'm serious, they're crazy. Then, then we have Islam on one hand. We can imagine, then you have the mixed religions in the middle. So there's no room for maneuver. So there's no room for an alternative viewpoint. I'm old. I have a few gray hairs, so I can get away with a few things. And I'm just as crazy, because when they're abusing me, I will tell them, Waka Shege, your father, and end of story, and they can't do anything. But that's because I'm not well upstairs anyway. Do you understand? So I can get away with it. But I also know that we have issues, Charmaine, don't we? We have real issues, and as we prepare for 2019, the elections that are coming, you see the stresses on the nation and the way patriarchy is working against women, and it's there. So those are the worlds that I inhibit as we have this discussion.
Great. Thank you very much. So, Charmaine, Iheoma just said, you know, we have issues. What for you are those key issues, those key priorities in the spaces that you're working in?
Well, some of the key priorities are in areas I'm not working in. Something that flowed both from what Iheoma just said and from our earlier discussion on silencing the silence. I think there's a real need for men with, who are feminists, at least try to be feminist in their perspective, theoretically and politically, to interrogate what makes it possible for perpetrators to engage in the acts that they do. You know, to do the kind of counterpart to the feminist counselors working with survivors. I know that I would never want to engage with a man who had carried out rape or sexual violence of different kinds. I think men should be doing that. But I also think that there's a need to, it's going to be difficult because whoever does it has to be open to hearing things that they do not agree with. But you have to inhabit that space in order to elicit the views so that you are better able to counter them. So that's one area. Another area, again, I'm also, apart from the whole question of the intellectual politics and intellectual production, within that, I'm very interested in the whole sphere of sexual politics, that nexus of gender and sexuality, how so much of what is gender is actually sexualized, and how sexuality has such very different outcomes for women relative to men, whether it's in how rape gets reported or how the extension of Sharia to include criminal law in the North means that girls and women are targeted by new crimes of zina. We were just talking about that at lunch. And I think that often the solution or the trajectory that many feminists take is to target the state. Or there are two sort of strands. There are some that target the state, so trying to change laws and policies, and there are others who I think this festival represents more, who work in the cultural arena, you know, trying to change through cultural production the things we take for granted in what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman. And I think that there needs, in some ways, we have to find or create greater convergence between these, because the state cannot get away with what it does. The political culture cannot continue to reproduce itself without there being some kind of consent at a societal level, you know? And Iheoma really alerted us to the coming dangers. Times of political transition, like elections, are like, these should be the, you know, the times when our antenna go up, the red lights light up. Because I think, you know, if last time round, 2015, there hadn't been Boko Haram, we would have had LGBT persons targeted for persecution, okay? This time round, Boko Haram has not disappeared, but it does not consume the nation in the way it did around 2015. So we have to be, very conscious of the dangers of how sexual politics will be used by politicians, by the religious entrepreneurs of different shades, by unthinking, well-meaning people to feed into a situation where girls and women will have their bodies treated as if they are not ours. All the sorts of things we were hearing about earlier.
Thank you. And so, as Charmaine was just saying, that, so in Nigeria, you're beginning to come towards a time of potential flux or change. Mona, obviously, a lot of the work that you became notorious in some circles for was sparked by a moment of so-called revolution, a moment of certain change, seismic change, and the way in which women were treated as a result of that change. Things have moved on, and yet they've also not moved on at the same time. Can you just speak a bit about where you are with that? And clearly, you're not here to speak on behalf of all Egyptian feminists, which I'm sure you're asked to do all the time. But from your own personal perspective, what have been the gains and what have been the losses?
Yeah, this actually nicely dovetails with what Charmaine was saying about politics and sexuality, because a central theme of my work is what I call the trifecta of misogyny. Because, as many of you know, there were revolutions that were started in Tunisia in 2010, and then Egypt, and then Libya, Yemen, Syria, Bahrain, etc. And each one of them has unraveled or stalled tragically in the case of Syria and Libya, and disappeared altogether in the case of Bahrain. And when people look at the Egyptian revolution, they often ask me, or they often just say, which really pisses me off, the Egyptian revolution has failed. Now, if for you the Egyptian revolution is a fight between the Muslim Brotherhood and the military rule, then it has failed. But that, for me, is basically a fight of one group of penises versus another group of penises, and that, for me, is not the revolution. For me, the real revolution, and when I talk about this, and when I talk about feminism, what I usually get is, this is not the time for feminism. Don't you know how important it is to release the 60,000 prisoners? Don't you know how important it is to work on the constitution, blah, 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 blah. And I say to them, yes, you know what? Nobody is free under military rule. Nobody is free under religious fundamentalist rule. That is true. But that military rule and the street and the home together oppress women. And that is what I call the trifecta of misogyny. So I'm not interested in the strictly political level of the penis versus the penis. I'm interested in the social and the sexual revolution. And that in Egypt and Tunisia and other countries in the region, you can see happening. And there are 2 or 3 examples that I want to share with you, in Egypt and Tunisia especially. In Egypt, we have just undergone the worst crackdown against the LGBTQ community in our modern history. Homosexuality is not criminalized in Egypt. The Brits, for some reason, those conservative Christian Victorians, for some reason, did not manage to convince us that man on top, woman on the bottom, that's the way to do sex, like they did in India. So we haven't had to unravel the criminalization of homosexuality, but we might very soon criminalize it. So why? Why is a military regime run by this fascist called Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, who was head of military intelligence, when at least 17 women revolutionaries were sexually assaulted in the form of so-called virginity tests? He's now our president. Why are we about to criminalize homosexuality potentially, and why have we had this worst crackdown against the queer community in Egypt? The most simple answer is, it's a distraction, right? Because we've had, the economy has plummeted because we've devalued our currency, we have a security problem, we have politics is shit, etc., etc. But that is too simple an answer for me. It's not just a distraction. People's lives are not just a distraction. I believe that this worst attack on the LGBTQ community, which began, by the way, when some people waved the rainbow flag at a concert given by a Lebanese indie group. 35,000 people attended a concert for a band whose singer, the lead singer, is openly gay. He's the openly gay Arab celebrity in the region. So just waving the flags precipitated this crackdown on the LGBTQ community. And I believe the reason that it's happening is because there is an increasingly bold sexual expression that the regime is trying to stifle. Because our regime is in charge of security, right? There are security guardians, but they also insist on being our moral guardians. And this is what patriarchy is. And this is why I insist on connecting the street and the bedroom to what comes from the presidential palace. So we've had the worst LGBTQ crackdown because there are all these blogs in Arabic and in English. There's an LGBTQ association that has a license in Tunisia. There's the Alliance of Queer Egyptian Organizations. This is unheard of. So people are openly saying, I am queer. People are going online and talking about sexuality. And as I said, a core part of my work is about sex and sexuality. So the second incident that I want to share with you is also from Egypt, where about 3 weeks ago, an Egyptian TV presenter was charged and convicted for, quote unquote, inciting debauchery, because this is also used against LGBTQ people. 69 people, mostly gay men, were charged or investigated under this inciting debauchery and immorality. So this TV presenter called Duat Sultan, what was her so-called crime? She went on her TV show and she discussed pregnancy outside of conventional marriage. She said to her viewers, have you considered sex out of marriage? It's like, oh my God, this guy's going to fall down. Have you considered marrying a man for a short amount of time until you get pregnant and then getting rid of him? Oh my God, she's going to get rid of the penis. How can this happen? So this is what I'm talking about. This is the kind of terror that sex instills into the heart of our moral guardians. So we have to ask the question, why? And the answer is sex is chaos and liberation, because our moral guardians can't control it. Rape is just fine for them because they're in control with rape, yes? But when we choose, when we consent, when we are the ones in charge of the sex and sexuality, they want it. So whether we being LGBTQ, and I increasingly identify as queer, I'm not monogamous, I'm in a relationship with someone I love very much, but neither one of us is monogamous and he's bisexual. So I increasingly identify as queer, and I do it especially in places where you're not supposed to identify as queer. The third example that I want to share with you is from Tunisia, which by most standards is the most quote-unquote successful revolution so far. And why is this example that I'm going to share with you happening? One of the answers is because the Tunisian parliament has 31% representation by women. Oh my God, it's not rocket science. When women are in positions of power, when women have a say in the laws that we pass, guess what they do? They pass a law against violence against women, and the violence against women in this case isn't the physical violence that we usually associate with violence against women. It's emotional violence and it's economic violence. And Tunisia has also lifted the ban on Muslim women marrying non-Muslim men. Again, this idea of ownership, yeah? Muslim men can marry Christian and Jewish women, but Muslim women cannot. And there's nothing in the scripture to ban this, so Tunisia has finally reversed this. And Tunisia is also, even more controversially, about to make equal inheritance between Muslim women and Muslim men, which it should do, and which every Muslim majority country should do. So these are all the things that I call the social and the sexual revolution. This will happen. We will terrify our moral guardians. We will terrify the patriarchy. And that's why I talk about sex and sexuality. I shared with many of you last time that I was sexually assaulted in the year of the Egyptian revolution. The Egyptian riot police beat me and broke both of my arms, and I was sexually assaulted, and I was detained by the Interior Ministry and military intelligence, again when Sisi was the head of military intelligence. So I'm absolutely not a fan of him, obviously. But because of that, and because of the taboos against us speaking out, I insist on talking about increasingly identifying as queer, being non-monogamous, being polyamorous, enjoying sex, desire, lust, pleasure, all of that, because our conversation cannot stop at sexual violence. This is part of the revolution. We have to move it forward into, I deserve pleasure. My desire belongs to me. My body belongs to me.
Thank you.
And that is the true revolution, and that, I think, is what you're seeing happening across the region.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go to questions in 1 second, but I just want you to jump off that, actually, about desire and women's desire and women's enjoyment of sex as a feminist issue and the work that you're doing. And in the meantime, if you have a question, could you please put your hands up now? Thank you.
Okay, jumping off from what Mona says, I think for me the biggest thing, it's almost as if we've opened a Pandora box on alternative viewpoints and discourse. My jump off will be starting from a Nigerian woman's perspective. Many of you have to understand that we, as Nigerian women, we are sexually frustrated, we are sexually repressed, we are bisexual. No, we are. We like both ways. All of it, baby girl. We doing it all. Now, religion and societal mores mean that we can't declare that we are interested. And that's where my business gets very interesting. Mm-hmm. Because I came at it with a very traditional, I'm going to run a business, this is what I'm going to do. Yes, I'm a feminist, it's going to be sex positive, I'm going to do X, Y, Z. You know, I did a business plan, I had the talk. You know, the African Women's Development Fund trained me well. But when I started, I discovered that I needed to do a lot more because the discourse on sexuality was fluid. And many of our women will say, but I'm married, but, Auntie, do you do hookups? I want to try a girl. Do you understand? Do you understand what I said? Auntie, do you do hookups? I want to try a girl. And it was a discourse that I was beginning to have. Now, in feminist spaces, I could have that discussion without feeling that I may be, I wasn't going to put the person in a situation of blackmail. Yeah. Because that's where we are in Nigeria. Yeah. You understand? Yeah. But then I discovered that as part of being a feminist, I need to have that discussion publicly because it is happening and I am seeing it as people come to me. Mm-hmm.
And there is something very powerful both about having these conversations in spaces like this, where we as African feminists are in the majority. Yes. But there is also something powerful, as you say, about being able to then to use what proximity you may or may not have to whiteness or to power, to have those conversations in those spaces as well. Thank you very much. Okay, so we have a roving mic and we have a question over here. Is there a volunteer who could just take the mic to the questioner? Is there a volunteer, please? Yes, someone's coming. Thank you. If you, in the interest of democracy, could you keep your question brief so we can get as many people as possible? Thank you.
Okay. I'll try to be as brief as possible. My name is Diakara. I have 3 questions, though.
Could you pick your favorite question?
Okay, my favorite question, I think is for Charmaine, actually. It's about theorizing the idea of being queer, for instance. I think beyond the state controls and all of that, I think there's a way in which we have normalized language to also be oppressive, to also police our sex in a particular way. So using the term queer now, I'm wondering if that isn't, in fact, part of the policing. Thank you.
Okay, Charmaine, theorizing queerness and language. Thank you. And then the next question, if the microphone could make its way to the next question, which is just here. Thank you. What's your answer?
Okay. I would agree with the point about language being a powerful space for creating and recreating norms. And anyone who reads or who writes will have some exposure to that. Where I would disagree with you is with the idea that using the term queer in itself reproduces the policing of restrictive norms. The whole idea is to transform the negative, to take hold of it and create it anew. So work, well, what one of the policing of gender norms does is by creating boxes around masculine and feminine, male and female, man and woman. And the term queer is really about transcending those boxes so that you don't have to be captured by whichever box you are supposed to fit into. And queer is about that very fluidity that both Mona and Iheoma were talking about. There have been parallels elsewhere, so reclaiming the term black to mean a positive sense in which black is no longer interpreted to mean the negative that it has been, you know, in hegemonic use of the English language.
Thank you very much. And the next question, yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, to start off, it's a short question, but thank you all for being here, and thank you for all the work that you do, and that's kind of my question. The two in Nigeria, Iheoma and Charmaine, sorry I'm using your first names, but I heard you both talking about groups and forums and these things that I never heard of, and I'd like to know how I and others like me can participate and, you know, work with you.
Okay, great. That's what I'm going to do is take that question because we have run out of time. So I'm going to ask you. Oh, was that?
Sorry, and yeah, she said NFF. Yeah, how do you join NFF?
AFF, African Feminist Forum.
AFF.
Yes.
Well, both of them.
All of them. Right. So what I'm going to do is ask you to sum up, really, both also at the same time. Firstly, what is it you want people to take from this particular conversation with regards to African feminisms? And where can people find out more? Which is generally quite easy these days, but it's easy if you know how. So actually, somebody has to tell you. So I'm going to start with you, Iheoma.
Okay, I do what I do because I'm the mother of 2 children. One is a 14-year-old girl, and she was at the 2006 African Feminist Forum in a pushchair. And I do what I do because I don't want her to look back and see that nothing has changed. I want her to be out there standing like the queen that she is. So I do what I do because she has to break down some walls. Do you understand? Now, in terms of where the forums are, we have a wider body, the African Feminist Forum, for which I sit on the steering committee. And at the same time, we have the Nigerian Feminist Forum that has a Twitter handle, and there is a steering committee, there's a website, there's a Facebook page. Twitter handle is NFF 2008. However, I'll put a caveat to that. Lack of resources. You know, we're not as lucky as our Ugandan sisters that have a forum meeting every year. They have been able to successfully transcend the lack of resources issue. At a Nigerian level, we haven't been able to raise any money locally to get various sections of the communities together. And it's not so much about being members, it's about understanding that we sat down and wrote at the first forum the African Charter of African Feminists. And it's on the charter, it's online, it's on the AFF and the AWDF website. It's a free resource because also there are other resources. It's translated into 4 languages: French, Arabic, English, and Jessica, correct me. Good,
Portuguese, Wolof, and Kiswahili. Yes. So that's the so AWDF, African Women's Development Fund. You can find on their website.
The African Feminist Forum also have a link, and the Nigerian Feminist Forum.
And there are great resources on there, like Know Your African Feminist. There's just a whole load of great stuff.
But they can come to me, and I can give you more details as well.
Thank you. Okay. Great. Thank you very. And what do you want people to take from this?
Well, if you need sex toys, my Twitter handle is @NigerDesires. We do self-pleasure. We are here. You can just call us if you want to just talk to a counselor as well, on a serious note. If you want to talk to somebody anonymously, No questions asked. We just listen to what you have to say without judging you. You're free to call.
Great. Thank you very much. Mona.
I might not call you, I'm going to interview you, but I need you to come to Egypt because one of my goals is to get a sex toy for every single Egyptian woman. Every single Muslim woman, actually, but every Egyptian woman, definitely. Okay, so I don't belong to any forum. I work alone, I work independently, and for a reason, because I need to be able to say, you know, fuck the patriarchy and not have to answer to anyone. So, but part of what I want you to take away is that you have incredibly powerful tools in the form of social media, and I know you're on social media, but you know, because we talk to each other on social media, but through social media, you can find, you know, groups like Hola Africa, right, who give incredible sex advice. Like yesterday, they had a whole thread about consent among queer women and in queer women's relationships. Today, the whole thread, they spent the whole day talking about pleasure under hashtag pleasure her. There's adventures from the bedrooms of African women, right? And the founder was here last year. I wish she was here as well. There are so many other places. And what I love about social media and why I encourage more and more people to go on social media is that it has created in the so-called virtual world what doesn't yet exist in the so-called real world. The virtual world is just as real as the real world. But until we're able to do and say all those things in that world controlled by patriarchy, create it in the virtual world. Let's find each other in the virtual world. So one of the things that I do, because I turned 50 this summer, and one of the things that I think is the obligation of someone who has privilege of any kind, and my privilege is age and the ability to say all this stuff, is that you have to fight 10 times harder than someone who doesn't have that privilege. So I go online and I talk openly about sex and sexuality and queerness and not being monogamous, but also the fact that I've chosen to be child-free. Because this is, again, as Africans, this is something that we don't talk about enough. I've never wanted to have children. I recognize and respect it, but it's not what I want. So I think that let's use that space to make the impossible possible, and then take that intoxicating notion of making the impossible possible into this so-called real world and making it even better.
Great. Thank you very much. And then finally, Charmaine.
I think one of the things I would like people to leave this session with is the notion that women can, should, and must be intellectual producers. This has been something that is an idea that is almost, well, I can't quite find the word for naming the thing that is unnameable, in a context where intellectual production is so demeaned and derogated, where even university lecturers are unable to produce intellectual work. Anyone who tries to do that outside of an institution is, you know, facing a double whammy. You're not a lecturer, so how can you do it? And even if you were a lecturer, well, what would you be doing anyway, you know? In terms of where one could go if you're not already in the networks, please do start from Feminist Africa Journal. Just Google it. You will find a wealth of knowledge, ideas. It takes you to the African Gender Institute website, which is at the University of Cape Town. Now, much of this work is being done through universities. So it's about researchers working together through these networks. But I really do want to reiterate what Mona has said about cyberspace and using not only social media, but the blogs and e-journals that are being created. And one of those that's featured in Feminist Africa 22 is The White Margin. It's being produced by Kenyan feminists, young feminists, so it's really about the journey of that first production. But it's also about them creating community. And so much of all of this is really about creating feminist community and different ways of doing that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Sorry to wind it up there, but the next WOW event is tomorrow, where we have a WOW Thinking at 1 o'clock. But for now, please say a great big feminist thank you to the fabulous panel.